Okay, so Diwali is around the corner. This is probably coming out around Diwali. So it's the perfect time to discuss something we hear all the time. How do we navigate around the Indian diet? If you're Asian and you're listening to this, then you're probably coming from a background of being very used to eating Indian food in your day to day. And the prospect of giving it up or changing it or adapting it can seem a bit daunting. The spoiler alert is you don't need to give it up, but adapting it can be very daunting. And if Indian food isn't part of your day to day already, but you love Indian food, and who doesn't love a good Indian curry, right? Pretty much everyone. Everyone wants to include Indian food in their diet somehow. So if you're not used to having it day to day, but you want to include it day to day, this podcast is gonna teach you how to include it in your day to day with some very, very simple hacks that we can kind of explore. So joined here by Coach Sanj with me today, and we're going to be diving into what's wrong with the Indian diet, the typical Indian diet, how to make the adjustments to it, and then sort of some applicable tactics to incorporate more of the Indian diet into your day to day. So let's kick it off with what's wrong with the Indian diet.
What's wrong with the Indian diet? It's
maybe you paint the picture of what the typical Indian diet is.
The usual Indian diet, I would say, is heavy in carbs, heavy in fats. Like if I think about me growing up, there would be a big element of having carbs, mainly carbs, even carb on carb. Like a curry would be carbs, and followed by the chapatis or whatever it would be, rice. It would always be complemented with a carb. So we're lacking in protein in so many respects. More around the fact that we don't know what contains protein, so we end up eating a lot of carbs. And the fats are, ghee and butter. People think that food can only taste good, based on just restaurants and maybe the ways our mums or parents have cooked. It's always free flow oil. It's never measured. It's like my mum's notorious for this. She doesn't measure anything, and she takes great pride in the fact that I just know what to do. I can estimate it and cook that way. So you tend to have a lot of fat, and then you have a lot of carbs. But what we neglect a lot of the time is the protein.
Yeah, I remember we go to those events and you see like let's say it's dal, which is like lentils, and you see the dal, and then you got the liquid of the dal, but then you got another layer
oil
because they haven't mixed it up yet, and then you basically got that two separations of food going on, or liquid going on.
And then the thing is, if you think about like the home Indian cooking, so that's where it's the free flow, not measured. Generally, actually, it can be made to be quite healthy. And there's a difference between healthy, as in calorie controlled, and having a balance, which is your macros balanced in terms of protein, carbs, and fats. But then if you go into the social occasion, if I look at the typical Indian wedding, for example, it's fried, and then more fried, and then maybe dal and rice. So if you're presented with that and you don't have any idea of how to handle it, then you're going to end up with having a lot of calories very, very quickly and not knowing how to navigate it.
Yeah, one thing I've noticed, this is mainly from my personal training days when I used to do body fat caliper measurements. So, used to use the calipers and then like pinch skin. And one thing I used to notice with a lot of Asian Indian backgrounds is that they used to have a lot of hard fat. Now, I don't really know my theory, these are completely anecdotal theories. So yeah, these aren't like entrenched in your research, but I think there's something my theory was that due to the excess use of these poor quality oils that Asians use, over the time, this creates a lot of inflammation and begins to quote unquote harden the fat cells. Now again, this is all theoretical, no hard evidence, but the amount of times I've seen it happen, I think there was definitely something in it.
Yeah, because our main oil source in Indian cooking would be sunflower oil, or vegetable oil. It wouldn't be like the clean oils that we would associate with like olive oil or anything like that. That's rarely used, more used now, but rarely used in Indian cooking. It would always be the processed or the real saturated stuff. So I think there probably is something in that. But it's devolved over time. And I was thinking about this. Like, why is our diet the way it is? And I was trying to think back to, how did it start? And if you go this is going a bit further back, but historically, if I think about when people came into the UK, for example, food has always been a sign of wealth, right? So if you could feed people, fried food or, opulent food, sugars, sweets, all these things, then it was a sign that you're welcoming. It was a very welcoming thing that you serve people these type of foods, and it's not as important now, but it's still very prevalent now because we've grown up that way. So before it was a sign of like, I can feed you, I can look after you, or going even further back, if I think about my family history, maybe they couldn't afford it back in the day. They couldn't afford those things. So when they could, they overindulged in them. So it's very hard to break those. Like, it made sense in those days, but it doesn't make sense in our social lives now. But we still carry that into our lives now.
But the generational thing is really important because that comes not only in food, but also in like work ethic and the way we work. Because, many of us are, second generation immigrants, the second generation. Yeah. So, our parents or their parents, came to the country with very little. So they came from a survival instinct. So they had to survive in order to be able to live day to day. And then that mentality has sort of dripped through the generations, even though we've gone from a state of scarcity, we don't have anything, to abundance and thriving, and yet we're still acting in our head and that we're in a place of scarcity. And for some of us, it can be effectively like a mental prison where you end up just sort of working yourself really, really hard because you think you've still got to do that because it's been passed down through the generations. Similarly, this is with food, right? Like you said there, with regards to being a sign of wealth, but and people in Asian backgrounds associate eating a lot and being slightly overweight as healthy. And that was definitely an element of the previous generations that by default then has sort of trickled down through the generations. I don't think now we're in a situation where we think it's healthy. Like, I think we're quite aware of that, but the habits that we've built from the years of growing up have given us predispositions to multiple health issues. And it's why you see a lot of Asians having a lot of health problems early on in life, whether it's diabetes, blood pressure. And you get to these events and people are comparing how many medications they're on. Sometimes they're boasting about it, sometimes they're talking about it, but it's in many ways they are boasting about these things because that's probably the slightly older generation than our generation. But because we've come up with those habits, I think one of the biggest reasons why people think the Indian genetics or the Asian genetics are bad is because of all these environmental factors. They're not actually bad. I think it's just an environmental thing and very much a cultural thing where we've always valued education and of our health. And that's the biggest reason why Indians and Asians struggle with that in the first place.
And if you think about the generations, like, things were left undiagnosed. So if you're going down the medical route, like if they passed away from high blood pressure, they wouldn't necessarily have known about that, or the fact that they have hardened their arteries due to so much fat consumption. You wouldn't necessarily have known that at the time. So they don't, this dietary habit would have been from long ago, but we wouldn't have. It's a lack of education because education wasn't there before, and now. In this generation, those habits that our parents and our grandparents have built in that social community setting, that's where I think a lot of people feel the pressure to eat. Right? Yeah. So a lot of our social events are around food. So it's not just getting together and spending time with the family. There's always an element of food. And I remember even growing up, if someone came to your house, you'd put something on the table. Or it'll be tea and snacks and things like that. And that mentality is very difficult to break. It takes time to break. We're starting to break it now, but even now, I remember when people come over, I feel the need to have to offer them food because that's the way I was brought up. And it's all linked into how we grew up. So a lot of our social, and so people find it hard to say no, even if they know that this is not aligned to their goals at the moment. Like, I know. With Diwali coming up, for example, there's going to be snacks galore. And for me, it's hard to say no. I do it now. But in the past, it would have been really difficult for me to turn it down because it was seen as rude, and you get the comments like, oh, if you are slimmer, then does your mum not feed you? It was those type of negative effects that came along with it. And then that plays on people's minds. I don't want to hear that. I don't want people to think that I'm not fed. And I don't want to be the one to turn down food because it looks disrespectful.
Yeah.
Those cultural things that have come into play. It's not necessarily even about knowing about what is protein, fats, and carbs. It's the cultural aspect, the social aspect of saying, no, I don't want this right now.
And when they give you the foods, it's basically just fat and sugar combined. And when we look at the typical Indian diet, it's very carb heavy. It's very fat heavy in some scenarios, and very low in protein. And I think that's probably where you end up with a diet that's very conducive to gaining body fat, not conducive to controlling your hunger, and not conducive to portion control, and not conducive to muscle mass. So you combine that with a lack of prioritizing health and fitness, you end up with a population that probably not going to look great, probably not going to have the best health, and probably going to have a society that's just fueled around food, as you just said.
Because if you don't change it now, that we're in the prime position to actually make an impact. Because like our kids, and our nieces, nephews, whoever the younger generation are around us, they see the same thing. So it has to break at some point. So the more aware we are of that, like my kids now, they don't necessarily know that this is a protein, fat, and carb, but their diets are automatically different to my diet growing up. Just because they have more choices, they have more variety, and I have more knowledge.
So let's explore like how we would actually make adjustments to the Indian diet. So let's say you're someone who's listening to this, you're used to eating a very traditional Asian food diet. What are some of the changes you make immediately that are quite seamless, but automatically make it a healthier diet or easier approach that supports body composition?
So you can still have curries. I think people think that you can't. You have a lot of people that So whenever someone who likes Indian food and is used to Indian food, they believe that when you're on a diet plan or a nutrition plan, it automatically means that you're going to be boiling stuff and having no flavor to it whatsoever. But actually, if you pare back the Indian diet, we've got the spices, which are absolutely fine. And you can use
pretty much all you need, right?
That's all you need, right? You've got the spices, and then you've got onions and garlic if you allow them into your diet. So you've got onions and garlic and ginger. Like if you just have those itself, you have got the Indian diet nailed down in terms of the flavor, in terms of protein. Like this is where there's often a misconception that the only thing, like lentils are great, and they are great, but lentils are also, as well as protein, they also are carb source. So you have to balance it out. But having a lentil-based diet, or pulses and grains and things like that, that is going to up your protein level automatically. Yogurt, a lot of people like yogurt on the side. That's great. You can combine that. You might have to change from a full fat to a zero fat, but again, you can make raitas and things like that with yogurt. You've got the basis of an Indian diet. Rice is fine. Even chapatis are fine. If you're low calories, you might want to replace the chapatis with rice, for example, just to get volume, because it expands and it's more for filling in that way. But there's nothing wrong with having chapatis if your calories allow it.
Yeah, the only thing is when you have lentils, yogurt, and chapatis and rice, you suddenly got like 150 grams of carbs per meal. So easy to rack up.
So then, if you're not a vegetarian, for example, chicken, chicken is an easy source for protein.
I think if you're not vegetarian, even if you are vegetarian, even if you're vegan, I think the biggest thing is you've got to add a protein source in that's not traditional to your diet. So you might have to have tofu curries, which can actually
You can have tofu curry. They taste great.
Burji.
Yeah. Tofu burji. If you have egg, for example, egg burji is a great one. So you can have tofu. Tempeh is great to make a curry out of. So yeah, you might have to have less of the beans and things like that. But you wouldn't have a whole curry based on just like kidney beans or chickpeas or whatever it might be. You combine it with, you can have a tofu and kidney bean curry. You can mix them and still have that flavor. But ultimately, what we're craving, the main protein source is, if you can get that right, everything else is flavor. The Indian diet is about flavor. So the spices are there. So it is just adding a protein source in that. Will that make all the difference? And fat. The other one is fat. So I cook with, and I don't know about you, but I cook with 1 calorie spray, and I can do pretty much tempering. So in the Gujarati community, it will be called vagar. I do that with 1 calorie spray. You put the the cumin or the I don't know what's the rye called?
What's that? The
black seeds.
The seeds.
So you put spray on, you put the seeds in, and then you put spray on again, let them pop or let them cook. That's it. Then you've got the tempering method. It's just not less oil. So I actually very rarely use oil in my curries. And if you make tomato-based curries, for example,
it's easy.
It's easy. Then you've got the liquid side of it, and the main source is going to be a protein. I've seen people use like paneer. If you use a low-fat paneer, replace that with just a full-fat paneer. That's an easy swap to make. Obviously, dependent on your full diet profile, but you can have paneer. Like people say, "Oh, I can't eat paneer." You can. You just have to choose a better one. That's all.
Yeah. It's honestly, when you put it that simply, it literally is that simple. And this is what I think doesn't quite register unless you until you actually do it, because you think you need to have the full shebang. But if you just take your Rotleys down from having 4 or 5 a night to maybe just having one, or even just not having those for a bit, and just having what you just said with a salad on the side and maybe some rice if your carb allowance allows it, you're going to get all you need, which is what you said, is the flavor. The flavor is the biggest missing part for most people, and they think, oh, they need that chili kick, or they need that, I don't even know what to call it. It's that thing, isn't it? They talk about that flavor.
It's the taste, right? It's a very familiar, very comforting taste. If you've grown up on it, it's a very comforting taste because it's so familiar to you, and just you get your palate going. And if you can get all of that without all the extras, like I had a lot of people say it only tastes best with butter. Like I was making something called pav bhaji, which is effectively mixed veg, mashed up with spices. But there's a need to add like a whole stick of butter in there. And I made it without telling them that I haven't added the butter in, and no one could tell the difference. So it's about making these small changes and trying it or reducing it, even if you're not. Try it small, small. It doesn't have to be the big bang. Just reduce things, and you'll find that actually the flavor is there. The flavor comes from the spices. It's not to do with the oils or the butter or the ghee necessarily. It's not that. It's the actual spices, and they're fine.
And obviously, like, we're not denying that if you add in the ghee, if you add in the chicken thighs instead of the chicken breast, all these things, it's going to taste much better. Like not much better, but it's going to taste better. Like there's no denying that.
It's richer. Yeah, it's richer.
It's just that richer fat. It's fat, right? You're just adding fat. The more fat you add into the meal, of course, it's going to taste great. It's like that's with anything, right? But once you have it a few times, you realize actually this is about 99% just as good.
Yeah.
Then it's like, okay, well, maybe I don't need to add all that, and I can save 1,000 calories a day by just not having in all these extra fats and extra carbs. And so long as if you eat meat, then you add in something like chicken. If you don't eat meat and you're a vegetarian, maybe it's low-fat paneer, maybe it's halloumi. I don't know if halloumis can work with curry, but maybe it's low-fat paneer. And then if you're vegan, and this is obviously for vegetarians and for meat eaters as well, but tempeh, tofu, all these things can work really well.
Soya mince works really well, right? Even the corn pieces, like it's fine to add in there, and it just adds a bit of texture in there. But those things absorb flavor really well. So if you let it cook, like I tend to make them in the afternoon. So when I do come to eating them, they've absorbed a lot of flavor. So, and again, curries are about flavor. So if you eat it, quite often, even if you've had a takeaway, if you eat it the next day, it tends to taste better. Same kind of principle. If you can, and time permits, make it a bit earlier. All those spices penetrate things like paneer, things like tofu, like tempeh, like the soya mince, all those things, they take on flavor. So if you can let it sit for a while, you're going to get the hit from that and get your protein in at the same time.
I remember when I was competing in 2017, I made this like offhand comment of like, I've gotten shredded eating curry every single day. And it was like, how did that work? I was like, yeah, just because like I had chicken curry every night, but I just used, like, at the time I was using Patax, the marinade. So it's not even like, I was just factoring it into my calories, but I was just using that with turmeric and a couple of coriander and a couple of other ones. I just had that every single day. It tastes amazing every single day.
I think a lot of misconsumption, especially if you're comparing it to takeout. So if I go down the takeout route.
Yeah, that's what it is, isn't it? That's good.
People think it has to be creamy or a lot of fat in there. But if actually you can create that impression of creaminess if your calories allow, you can use cashews, for example, blend them down, right? And it creates that creaminess. So a lot of paneers tend to have that. And again, it is calorie dependent, but also yogurt. You know, if you let it cool and add yogurt in, you got that creaminess feeling without the actual cream and the calories. So it's all about, sometimes it's about tricking the mind a little bit, in that you feel like you're eating something opulent because it looks like something you would eat at a restaurant. So if you can even trick the mind like that a little bit, you can still have, and a lot of people won't even know the difference, that it's not full of full fat cream or whatever it is. You're on mute.
Very good point. So what are some of your game-changing recipes that we can try today?
So even if I make bar bhaji, for example, and that is a very like a comforting food for me, I'll still add some like tofu in there. The thing is, it gets mashed down, so it gets scrambled. Like if you scramble it, for example.
What's this, tofu?
Yeah.
Yeah.
You scramble it and you put it into something like, so bar bhaji effectively is a bun, and it's lots of vegetables. But just by adding tofu in there, all of a sudden you've increased the protein, right? So you've got that mix, and my carb source comes from the bread. If you're not, if you're in a heavy diet phase and you're trying to get more volume, for example, I tend to like a good paneer, right? So chili paneer is something that we've been brought up on, and that's a very simple thing. I brought up on more recently. Yeah. But again, marinate it in, and I don't need any fancy marinades. It is literally, you can buy all these like teacup, not in paste, they're like literal granules, you know. So you buy these shorts, I have loads of them. So I mess around with harissa and all sorts of these little mixed spices. Add them in there. You don't even need any liquid necessarily, but you can add a bit of water, marinate it, and then that forms a base of pretty much any of my curries. So if I'm using paneer, it'll be that. For the girls, they like dal, so I tend to do dal in there. That's protein, but again, comes with carbs, so you limit the amount of rice you'd have with that. Yeah. You know, like for the kids, it's different, but if it was me, then I would make sure that I'm not overdoing it with the rice, and it'll be more of the protein. What else do I like? To be honest, I eat eggs, so egg curry is quite a good one for me. And again, that hits all the protein straight away, and it's a tomato-based one. So that is a very, very simple. But if you just use the basis of tomato, you can put anything in there, you know, as long as you get the spicing. And my staples will be chili, garlic, onion, and ginger. Like with that mix, I can make anything, really.
Yeah, I think it's those simple hacks, like if you're gonna have rotli, don't have rice.
Yeah.
You're gonna have rice, don't have rotli. But
yeah. You don't need both. And again, I think it's a social or more of a family thing. A lot of families would have all of that. So it wouldn't be just curry and rice. It'll be curry, rotli, rice, something else, salad. This will be like a little tally going on every day, because that's the way they've done it, and it's fine. But then you need to know, actually, at this point in time, I'm just going to have rice and the curry, and the salad. In fact, half my plate is going to be salad, and then there's going to be my curry, and then there's going to be whatever my carb is, and usually that's, you know, like a quarter of the plate. If you're looking at visually a plate, if you put half of it as a salad, you're already winning. You know, you've already changed the proportion of how you, instead of like a few lettuce leaves and some cucumber, that would be half your plate, and then you have the rest of it.
So for those who are living in fear of Diwali, or thinking, they're going to away, or whatever their misconceptions may be, to take into Diwali and overall the festive season as a whole?
So, like, I think we were discussing this on one of our coaching calls. Diwali, even though it's one day and New Year's is the second day, it tends to span this 2 weeks. So, you know, the social events can carry on for quite a while. So it's not just about Diwali and the New Year. You might be meeting family and friends throughout this festive period, which can last a few weeks. So I would firstly start with, choose your events that you want to focus on. You know, ultimately it's about spending it with your family and your friends and your loved ones. But it doesn't mean you have to eat at every single social event. That's one. Like, you can choose where you're going to eat and where you're not. snacks and sweets, like this season is all about barfi and all the sweet snacks. I would say if you want it, have a little bit of it, and most of the time it's enough to satisfy you. The rest of it is just you know, it's just there, and you feel like you're going to eat it because it's there. I tend to have, and I remember when I did that photo shoot, it was a week after Diwali, and I was surrounded by this stuff. And you just have to know that at that moment in time, it's not for me, and I will have it later. Like I'd have a little piece, I saved one piece, and I had it later. But you don't have to eat the whole plate. You know, just because it's there doesn't mean you have to eat it. So I'd say choose what you're going to eat and know that it's coming. Part of it is awareness. Like you know that when you're going to go to whoever's house, there's going to be all this stuff. You can use like if it's a dinner, I would say you can have your protein shake and stuff beforehand, an hour before, and then you go in there not so full, not so, you know, it's a bit like a restaurant environment. It's made to feel like you want to eat. Yeah, it's enticing. The smells are enticing, all of that. So if you can have something beforehand and then go in, have a plan of knowing that actually I'm only going to eat this, and then that's it. You don't have to eat everything that's there. Chances are there'll be, if there's 3 or 4 items, I use the same scenario for weddings. If I go to a wedding, I know there's going to be at least 3 items that are fried. So if I want to have something, I will choose the one that I really want. And then I would ignore the rest, because quite often you eat anything, I shouldn't have eaten that because I didn't like it anyway. I ate it because it was there rather than actually wanting it. So I would pick the thing that I want to eat. You want to enjoy Diwali. Like, we have to remember that this is a time to enjoy it. Yeah. But then that doesn't mean going crazy. It's about having control. So if you can control that scenario, then you're going to be in a much better place.
And when you're in control is when you're less likely to be guilty. You feel guilty afterwards. There's nothing worse than eating something and then the next day feeling guilty. That's what just spirals a vicious cycle and continues to make things worse mentally.
And also, sorry, go ahead.
No, go.
I was just going to say, like, it also, you end up in a Sodic type mentality, like, because you feel guilty about doing it, then the next day you're going to do it again, and then the next day you're going to do it again, just because you think, oh, you screwed it up now anyway, so you might as well carry on screwing it up. Well, actually, if you say, look, I've done it, that's it, it's done, now I'm going to move on, then you're in a much better place anyway. So letting go of the guilt, knowing that, you know, you are Diwali, it's a religious event, but it is going to be a food event. So pick what you want, and then that's it, you know, then carry on as normal. And you don't have to say yes to all the social events. Or saying or eating at all social events. Not all of them are about eating. And the snacks that are going to be there, it doesn't mean you have to eat them. You choose to eat them.
Yeah, I still think there's the whole social stigma thing. I think people get it across all populations. I still think it's the biggest within the Asian culture. Mainly because I'm probably exposed to it most, so I see it the most. But I think there's still a lot of work to be done with regards to education and awareness around health and fitness in our culture. And I think, like you said, it's getting better and better each year that goes by, mainly because more of us our age are sort of taking control of our health and fitness, and that sort of inspires other people. And I think the next generation will be completely different.
I think it feels worse because, again, it's associated with disrespect. So saying no to food is historically seen as disrespect. But if you can actually say, thank you, that's really kind of you, but I'm actually focusing on myself at the moment, and I'm really, you know, trying to do this for myself, then you haven't disrespected them. You've explained why you're doing it. I think sometimes we're afraid to do that, to say, actually, I don't want to do this, but there's a reason for it. And it's because I'm trying to be healthier. I want to eat healthier. If you can just turn it around, then they don't see it as disrespect necessarily. You know, they know that you're not doing it because you're trying to disrespect them. You're doing it because you're trying to do something for yourself. Now, that's a mentality that will change over time. But I think we feel that I would feel that when I first started saying no to things, I felt it more than the other person, to be honest. So it was me that was feeling it, not them. But I was putting it down to, they're going to think this. But you don't know what they think.
Most people don't care.
They're okay.
You just get past the first few seconds and potentially one comment. After that, they won't care.
And quite often, I always, if I know I'm not going to eat somewhere, and it's a close family member, I'll tell them, I'm coming. I just want to see you guys because I really miss you, but I'm actually not going to be eating. So even doing that, then they already know that, because again, you think that, oh, they've cooked all this stuff and then you're not eating. But chances are, like, if I go to my family's house, for sure, there's going to be so much food there that they're overcooked anyway, that me not eating is not going to shift the needle at all. By one person not eating, nothing's going to change. But just as like I would sometimes say, I'm not going to be eating, thank you, but I just really want to see you guys because I haven't seen you in ages. So I'm going to pop in.
Then the trick to do is, if you're hosting a family event, is don't use oil and see if anyone notices. I know my family now don't cook with oil, which is really good to see. And I'll never see anyone complain, which is the ironic thing.
Another hack, actually, for a lot of people nowadays have air fryers. So before, people used to deep fry everything. You can easily put stuff like, if you're going to have samosas and things like that, then one quick way of reducing the calories and all the fats that go with it is air frying them. So you, again, put the spray on it and put them in the air fryer. And actually, they might look a little bit paler than they would if you deep fried them, but taste-wise, they're exactly the same. So air fryers are great for Indian food and Indian like savouries particularly. So that's another hack, and a lot of people own them these days. So I would definitely look into that if you haven't got one already. You're muted.
Sorry, bad habit. The ironic thing is, when we speaking through this, a lot of the changes for the actual Indian diet, quote unquote, is actually very minimal, and people can have all the foods they love. And I think this would also apply to any diet across the world, right? It's we're saying the Indian diet just because it's something we come across a lot, but any diet in like its sort of like traditional sense, it's probably going to have some tweaks, and it's usually around like oil, around choosing one carb, not 3 carbs, around adding protein in. If we can do that, it's probably very similar to actually fixing the Western diet. You just don't have every single carb and reduce poor quality fats and add protein in. You're going to be in a much healthier place.
I think in the summary of our Indian diet is the most simple thing we can do is add protein. That is it. That by default would reduce the carb, because if you had protein, which is actually more filling and satiating anyway, then you wouldn't need so much carb. But even like our curries are like, I remember having potato curry and then rotli with it. So it's like there's very little protein element to that curry at all, or that meal at all. So
the other thing, go on.
If you just go in with every meal, I think, where can I add protein in to this meal? That's probably fixed half the problem. Then it's, how can I reduce the fat? Because if it's usually very fatty, using a 1-calorie spray or doing something a little bit different, everything else is the same. The spices are the same. Everything that doesn't change. People say to me, "Oh, how can I cook onions if I don't add oil?"
Yeah.
Kind of 1-calorie spray is great. Add a little bit of water, it sweats the onion off. Add a little bit of salt to that, it'll sweat it even more. The onions are cooked. You don't actually have to have any. I can cook onions without any oils if I really wanted to. So just add a bit of water and it starts sweating, and then the onion is cooked.
Yeah, I've never heard the phrase "sweat the onion," but I'm probably not as culinary.
I like cooking.
As you are. Yeah. Any other top tips that people should take away that they can really transform the way they think about cooking?
I think if you just acknowledge the fact that you're not giving things up, like I think just that simple mentality is, by going on a fitness journey, you're not giving anything up, right? So you're just adapting what you already love and doing it a little bit differently. And the only thing that you're doing, and part of it is going to be education, like knowing what is a protein. Like a lot of our clients or people in general, like if I said to my mum, "Is this a protein?" she would have no idea. So part of our duty as ourselves is to educate ourselves and, okay, this is my meal, where's the protein in here? If you can get that balance in yourself, then it's a very simple thing. Everything else remains the same. Like my masala box has not changed. It's exactly the same. It just means that I've added a protein source to it.
That's actually a game changer, that masala box. All you need to spicy food, just make sure you don't add the oils in front of it. That's it. Just make sure you're spicing up some protein, and that's the key fix. When you open up that box saying, "What am I going to put? Which protein source am I going to put that on?" That'll solve half the problems. Because like
exactly.
you said, it's just a race. It's a race to finish the Rotley stack otherwise. And
Yeah,
also that whole racing mentality is half the problem. Was another half the problem as well. Where in our culture, it's very much like how fast can you eat quickly, finish your plate, get out, let the next group eat, right?
yeah. It's because it was like there were so many people that
That was
they
back
was
in the
usually
day.
split into
Yeah,
like in like in our family it was really bad. It was like the females eat together, the males eat
yeah,
together,
yeah.
the children eat together. It's all of this. So it was like we need the next lot coming in, so hurry up, get on with it, and then let the next lot in.
It's just a
But
cooking operation, isn't it?
it was, but if you can just move away from like you've seen me, I eat so slowly. It's almost embarrassing at times how slowly I eat. But if you've got a protein source, usually it requires a little bit of chewing. So if you can focus on chewing, you're going to feel more full, and then you won't need so much. And before it was a badge of honor. You know, I ate 10 Rodleys or whatever it was. It was very much a thing that people used to say. You know, I can eat 10 Rodleys, or I can eat
Yeah,
7 Rodleys, whatever it might be, whatever that number is.
yeah.
But actually, if you can just say, I've eaten, and I would still say with the curry, focus on the curry. If that's your protein source, focus on that bit first. Then you find that you need less rice and you need less of the roti, for example. You won't need as much. But if the Indian diet is mainly those, like that's the majority of it. Like if you're looking at what people think that they're going to miss out on, it's going to be curries, rice. It's not even the fried items, because the fried items is not a day-to-day thing. That's going to be your more social events. So that you can manage by just limiting which one you're going to go for. But in the day-to-day, nothing really changes. It's just the way, the method changes. That's all.
Perfect. Perfectly done. So there you have it. That's how you navigate the Indian diet, eat healthier, stay fit, and hopefully pass this on to the next generation.